There are tools to spoof cached MAC addresses, which is how those things work, and you can basically get around them as a result. I've not actually tried this yet.
All winter.
It's okay, I keep telling myself one of these days I'm going to learn how to use Generative.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, there's the list of like privacy things I know I should do, but I need to be even more skilled and smarter is a very long list.
For me, it's just time. Like, I feel so bad. This dude contacted us because he's writing a book, and he's like, I'm looking to do like interviews and stuff, promote the book. And
like I said, we're live now. Hey, to anybody watching online, we're still actually waiting for our speaker to get here, so hang tight. You may see a boring screen for a little bit.
Green, but it's all irrigated water. So it depends what part of Oregon. I don't know the rest of the West Coast, but I know Oregon. I've seen all of that. See all of that, and it's not like Portland.
You're the mountain, that sounds nice.
What's it?
You're the mountain, that sounds nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of forests and parks. And
No worries. No worries.
Or, national parks.
All right, speakers here, everyone. We're all good. All right. I will get Emily in here real quick just to help with any technical setting up. Cool. And I got Emily coming to help. You were so competent, you may just figure it out on your own.
Yeah, do we have an HDMI?
Yeah, here it is. Right here. Sweet. And it's not very long.
Oh, it's not very long.
We might be able to plug it in somewhere else or get an
I
extension.
also might have a USB-C to HDMI cable.
Yeah, I figure in this room, at least one person can assist us, but you never know. I swear they used to have crazy. Yeah, it used to be longer, yeah. I used to have one. All right, while you guys are figuring this out, I need to actually set up my computer so that I can deal with anybody bothering us online.
Well, I guess I'm not grabbing slides this week.
Maybe my HDMI cable walked out. Oh, it is what it is.
Also,
anything you grab is better than the live stream.
Also, Kevin,
Yes.
delivery.
Oh, thank you. Got your shirt. Oh, yes. Aslan makes AI art shirts, everyone. FYI. Everything's just getting here. We're still getting set up, so we're getting started in just a second.
Have you ever been to these before?
I used to have a kind of like HDMI to USB-C converter, but do not have that.
My laptop has various USB-C to other thing converters on its ports, so I might be able to.
Oh, yeah, because you have a framework.
Yeah, I have a framework. An old one, but I do have a framework.
If you want a t-shirt, will we reach out to you personally?
Yes, yeah, although I don't do delivery. That's the
Okay,
thing.
no, that's
I literally just buy extras whenever I'm buying a shirt, so.
But I mean, he's literally modeling one for me.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, it's for my own benefit mostly.
Let's see.
Not everything
Yeah.
has to be a nonprofit.
Yeah, right.
I know how to do a little of this. Like I know we turned this on, so.
Well, the question is, oh my God, I'm just gonna have to move this thing over here.
You may. Yeah.
So where can we move this to?
Here it is. All right. Well, here's the tech support, so you can talk.
What's that?
Is it possible to get a cable that goes from here to here?
Yes, we just have a really short one for some reason. I'll get a longer.
Yeah, it's normally longer. That was a little weird.
I know, that's strange.
You see a lot of change.
Do you need an adapter as well?
HDMI is fine, or USB-C, whichever.
Okay.
Then
We're getting it all done.
that's cool. Was it a bunch of them? Was what? Discover TV. I guess I don't know what this is unless it's software.
Oh, so, no, I don't know how to do that.
Oh, okay.
All right, get on here.
Okay. So your company makes software that helps people understand what's going on with their business and finances? Yeah.
Awesome, thank you so much.
I'm trying to retire, and I've got a really strong interest that I want to pursue.
Sorry, it'll actually project behind you,
Okay, cool.
Yeah, they do it right on the wall.
if that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
So I would like to help push the U.S. policy.
Move it on to the screen.
It's powering up.
Because I don't see how we survive as a society if we can't figure out how to make it work for the middle two-thirds. So I study CE, economics, policy, and also like
Hi, y'all here for EFF?
Yeah, we'll be getting started in just a few minutes, just finishing
I'm
setting
trying to
up.
figure out how to, take this CE stuff I know about.
Does the
Well,
projector
I
even
literally picked this thing up from the P.O. Box a couple hours ago, and it was charging on my desk at work.
Are there no lights on?
let me see if display.
But it's not going to use that, it's going to use that.
Oh, you got the fancy
Let me
settings.
display
Very good.
Which I had.
Something in smaller bites.
Yeah, I have vague memories of when I was young and had vague dreams of making films, and I temporarily knew quite a bit about this stuff. It's been very forgotten, a lot of it.
I do a variety of things. I came to Austin as
It would help if you showed me that message for more than 2 seconds, guys.
And you'll have time to figure it out because you'll get my usual spiel at the beginning, so you'll have all through that.
Streaming function.
Yes, I was really on the work from home. I did that, and then, I guess I've tried to do a variety of things, but I left the thing with mom maybe 5 years ago, and I was trying to figure out if I should have done this.
Well, something just happened just now.
Yeah? What happened?
Well, this thing was big and then it got small again.
Oh,
so-
like as if it was detecting another screen or something?
Yeah, I replugged it back in.
Yeah, I pushed the on it, which is
Yeah.
normally works, but this is definitely a talk. We probably want the slides if
Yeah,
possible.
I mean, it's pretty much impossible without them. It's mostly me just showing parts.
Yes, which is great, which is why we want this to work.
But Twitter is very useful until Elon took over, and it just seems to be sort of a train wreck for my.
Could you share to this screen?
Yeah, sure.
So I got
Yeah, we're
on
not too picky on the screen. I mean, it might suck a little bit for anybody watching on the live stream, but if this is all we can do,
I just don't know what's going on with this projector.
yeah. If this works, this will work for the audience.
Yeah.
And we never have more than 3 or 4 on the live stream, and they'll be able to hear you.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
Is there not, it's not gonna play on the live stream at all?
Well, no, at least you're gonna run it. They'll hear you.
Yeah, but will they see stuff?
Well, probably not, because it's
Let's
not
put it
it's
live
live
stream
from that.
it's more important if people, because I'm gonna send a link to a bunch of people.
Yes, anybody who watches, we can certainly send it on to them. And also, Nick, if you can get his new camera, we'll keep watching you filming you, which will give a much higher.
I can also adjust the shot to get more of the screen.
Yeah, actually, if you could aim the camera to try to get this, that would be great. But you're already doing a lot. So
Where should I plug in stuff? I guess is the question.
we're dealing with a minor technical difficulty. We'll be starting to say, feel free to keep chatting amongst yourselves.
Well, I mean, there's okay, I'll find out. People that work there, you're like the prospect.
It was actually upstairs. The lobby door was upstairs. Right.
How many people read?
Second floor upstairs in the lobby.
There's some stuff that's like, I don't really know this.
Hey, check that out.
Well, me too. I'm on Mastodon, and so I try to, read his basic essays almost every day. Big, long comments.
Yeah, I mean that's supposed to be the idea,
I
right?
try to, I can't read it all.
Normally it just works, but
What's the
it on. Set it to HDMI. It's some issue with the projector itself, like the Epson up there.
Yeah.
There's no easy way to get up to it.
right? Yeah.
I mean, I could push it in. Where I just hit on.
That is the eternal cry of someone when they're things not working.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but it works. It absolutely works.
Yeah.
We joke, but it absolutely works.
I wonder if it's even maybe like a lot, but
Well,
It's sort of transformed into
but that's just I think this
like rows, the tech rows.
Oh, that's just the other end. They got the long cable. I see. Well, I hit on, but yeah, there's no evidence that is turning on in any way.
yeah.
What is it gonna be?
Is anybody freaking out?
Oh, so you're not laughing at me.
Oh, no, sorry.
It was like, I was thinking it's a drug, but what did I do? What is it? So why do people in recreation? For
Well, I mean, even the live stream where it is actually catching that screen. So actually, if you project here, the live stream is catching that screen. That says something.
There's another one there. Hey, what's up? Hey, I'm doing good. How you doing, man? Yes, yeah, we just got it. Yeah.
He figured it out. Yay!
Great job, Taylor. Yeah, I guess you can shift it a tiny bit to the left, but we are getting both in.
Yeah,
So
I can
we
adjust
can't-
here. I can show you this one.
Oh, yeah, I jam it up because I want to. So that's what it looks like right now. So we definitely have a little space on that. So that's
Okay.
and I guess, yeah, if it
Do you want me to zoom in a little?
if it could
I
be
figured
a little to the left and a little down if possible.
Okay, I don't know.
It doesn't look like you can do both because I think zoom would actually just cut it off. But I mean, yeah, a little left and a little down would be my choice.
Definitely get it
Down,
I don't know if I can go further.
yeah, actually down.
Yeah, right now.
There's glare. They're only going to see so much. But
Basically, we're doing a demo.
I should adjust a little bit this
Today,
okay, yeah, I know. That's
go
good.
more.
Yeah, I guess we'll figure out whatever happened with the projector.
I'll let our IT manager know.
Yeah, it happens. I know.
But luckily, we have a backpack.
I know. It'll be okay.
It'll be good. Okay, cool.
Thanks for hanging out.
Hey, you have a full screen.
I will be at the front. So,
Oh, you have the tears.
and then just
right. Thanks to me, unless I message you otherwise, stop by around.
It's not that simple.
Alrighty. I guess let me know when you're good to go and I can give the intro.
Yeah, I can give you some screen. You can do this one.
Yes, actually, I think. Show me it. I mean, I've done it at work before, but maybe there's some weird thing with the multi-screen stuff. So if you go to slideshow, it should be this interview.
Yeah, so that's why I did that. This is not full screen. So how do I get this?
That's a great question.
It's like F11.
Well, also, yeah, you're in Mac world. I was doing it on Windows, so it may be different, but you're in a browser.
It's F11 or something, right?
Yeah, that's no, that's a different screen. I mean, all right, let's see. There you go. We figured it out. We're doing it. All right.
Yes, I'm ready.
Nick, how ready are you?
It's not seeing this screen.
Well, I can give you about 5 or 10 minutes. It's probably okay. All right, let me double
Honestly,
check.
I'm probably not even gonna pick up.
Let me double check.
Let's troubleshoot this in a minute.
There's some seats over here if you're. Yeah, sure thing.
Sorry, the tables are kind of tight together.
Oh, hey, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, there's some technical difficulties. All right, I will go ahead and get us started. All right, wow, quite an audience. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the latest monthly installment of the EFF Austin Meetup. To those of you in person and anybody watching online, I know there's at least one old friend. Welcome all. I see old faces and new. We are so happy to have you all here. Like, this is definitely the biggest non-virtual post-COVID crowd we've had in a long time. So welcome all. Though we don't, it isn't the all-time record, I think, unless there's. We had 60 in person about 5 years ago, and we had 75 one time virtual Zoom. But we had people all over the world from that one, so that was fun. But this is impressive, so I just wanted to commemorate this moment. It's very humbling to see that people are still really interested in these topics in this community. So new and old faces, welcome. So welcome to the, as I said, the EFF Austin Monthly Meetup. My name is Kevin Welch. I'm the current president of the board at EFF Austin. One of our other board members is here, David there, so you can find either of us if you want to chat about EFF Austin. So you're like, if you wandered in here just because you saw it on the Cat Factory calendar and are like, who the hell is EFF Austin? So EFF Austin, we are an Austin-based digital civil liberties organization. We're over 30 years old at this point. I was not there at the time, though we do have one original board member still on the board. We're closely affiliated with a name some of you may have heard of, Electronic Frontier Foundation, based out of San Francisco. They're the nation's oldest and largest digital civil liberties advocacy group. You can kind of think of them as the ACLU for the internet, basically, but they work to protect your rights in emerging technological spaces, especially your First and Fourth Amendment rights to free speech and expression, and your right to, essentially, your implied right to privacy under the Fourth Amendment, combined with the Ninth and 14th. It's complicated, but in technological spaces. So, we think this leads to a free society where we can all express ourselves and flourish to our full potential. They fight for a lot of great causes, net neutrality, end-to-end encryption, protecting Section 230 of the CDA, which is what lets you say what you want on websites without them getting sued out of existence, all sorts of fun stuff that makes the internet the place we know, love, and sometimes hate, but still are happy is there. So, they're great people. You should give them their money. If you have extra money, you can always give us money. We have a PayPal link on our website, etc. We mostly do educational monthly meetups. EFF is a far bigger org than we are. They do federal advocacy mostly. We're on a much smaller budgeted team. Basically, this is pretty much volunteer-based. We don't have any full-time staff. But hey, if you want to help us do things, we're always looking for volunteers and people who want to get involved. So get with us. But yeah, we mostly are educational. We do these monthly meetups, second Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. here at Capital Factory. We try to have a diverse group of speakers on interesting topics at the forefront of technology, law, and society. If you know cool people who should talk to us, send them my way. I always need new speakers. Maybe you're that cool person. So get at us. I mean, I'm very broad in the topics I'll allow, so don't think like, oh, that's not on topic. It probably is actually if it's about interesting new tech stuff and how it affects people going on. Yeah, and so we have a few cool meetups coming up that I'll highlight. I know September, we're going to have some people, we're going to actually have a virtual speaker come in from Tech Landlord Watch, who was a group affiliated out of UT, but I think the lead researchers now at University of Washington. But they do stuff about all the various ways landlords use technology to abuse their tenants, things like smart locks to lock people out, you know, cameras in the hallways, etc. So we're going to have them talk to us about that emerging civil rights issue. We're also, we have a very cool speaker in October who's also going to be virtual, but really is kind of a rock star. We're going to have the legendary Harvard fellow and world-class cryptographer Bruce Schneier is going to be speaking to us. And going to be, the final topic still to be determined, but I specifically asked him if he could talk to us about the emerging new technology of passcodes, which are proposed to replace passwords. And I'm going to talk to him about what are the pros and cons of this new technology, both from security and a privacy standpoint. So that should be a lot of fun. We still need speakers for November and December, so get at me if you know some more people. Also, let's see other things about what we do. We do some political advocacy, though not quite as much as National EFF, mostly at the city and state level. We did give some testimony in the recent Texas legislative session, specifically on HB 4, the big data omnibus privacy bill, basically. We basically testified to the effect we thought it was better than existing law because there was none, but we were one of the actual rare groups in dissent because we didn't think the law went far enough in protecting people's data privacy. It's law now. As I said, it's better than what we had before. We're going to be continuing to explore how to improve it in the next legislative session. And at the city level, we've been very involved in discussions with the city council around the return of the automated license plate reader program, which we wish wasn't coming back at all, but there was not the political will to kill it outright. But we did do a lot of lobbying to massively strengthen the law with some of our allies on city council. Probably Councilmember Chito Vela is probably the biggest person who deserves a shout out because he definitely worked with us very hard on trying to improve that bill. And I actually do have to credit Mayor Kirk Watson as well, because recently with a revisiting of the law, with his support, we were able to get the 30-day data retention period down to 7 days, which still sucks, but it's a lot better than 30 days. So that's the sort of stuff we fight for, and we encourage you to get involved and reach out to your politicians if you want to make clear how these issues matter to them and are important in your life. So yeah, we also occasionally throw cool cyberpunk parties if we can find people to fund them. So if you know rich tech founders with too much money who support digital celebrities, please introduce me to them. So with that being said, without further ado, I will probably very quickly turn things over to our speaker here now that I've given you a nice long intro. I guess before I do that real quick, I'll just say, are there any community announcements? I'd like to ask the room if there's anything that the community would like to share. Shameless self-promotion is totally cool as long as it's vaguely relevant to the interests of the digital celebrities community. Is there anything going on in town or anything anybody's working on that they'd like to share with everyone? Now is your brief moment to do that.
I got something.
Oh yeah, share it up.
Paul and I, so I'm Liani, her District 3. Paul, can introduce himself. District 7, him. We are...
Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, keep going.
We're part of Open Austin, which is a...
They're awesome, by the way. Tell Mateo I say hi. I haven't seen him in a long time.
I will tell him. And thank you for your advice 2 years ago on how to rearrange the boards. So.
Oh, right, we had that conversation. God, it's been so long. Yes.
It's super longer.
I know.
So, Open Austin is a nonprofit group that supports economic and social equity, but instead of frontline advocacy, we do behind-the-scenes advocacy. And so that means crafting data-informed narratives so the other advocacy groups and other nonprofits can actually do the lobbying with City Council and do that effectively. So instead of evidence and narratives driven by qualitative and experiential knowledge, we're like, we can give you numbers. And so if you are a data person or a product manager, talk to me or Paul. Or also, if you, I feel like I'm poaching, Kevin, if you know rich tech friends that also want to
We all need it. It's not a zero-sum game.
If they're rich, they probably have enough for 2 organizations.
They do, and we really don't need a lot of money to make incredible stuff happen. Ask anybody about our 2017 Cyberpunk party with Cory Doctor and Bruce Sterling at the Vortex Theater. We did that for a relatively small sum of money, and it was pretty dang cool. So, yeah.
So if you support data informed advocacy, let's see, our community action nights are every other Wednesday, so you can find us on Meetup. And for more information, you can reach out to either of us.
Yeah.
Open-austin.org.
They're awesome people. Definitely check out their stuff. They've been big supporters of ours for a long time, vice versa. Great stuff. And yes, we need data people, because one thing that was so annoying in the ALPR fight is that the whole fight on both the pro and anti side basically boiled down to scary anecdotes about ALPRs helping solve crimes or hurting innocent people, and we did not have enough hard data to prove one way or the other. So data is very important in these debates.
Is that about the license plate
Yes,
readers?
that's the license plate readers. We're against them, but the truth is there's not enough data on either side of the debate, because people just believe what they believe without using data. So, yes, go help Open Austin get more data. All right, if we don't have any other announcements, I will give a brief intro to our speaker.
I would like to make an announcement.
Yes.
Hey everybody, my name is Nathan Thomas. My training is around finance, sales, and business. So I'm trying to break into AI. So I'm very new with elementary when it comes to AI, and I learn as much as I can. This was not supposed to be the event I was supposed to go to. I missed the event from yesterday, which is Austin Sharp Week. I'm trying to move my network in AI, specifically in large language models, to understand how that can be tapped in real estate. So if there's anybody with any sort of curiosity behind that, I'd love to connect. So.
I saw at least one hand, so maybe we'll help you out there. Anybody else? No? All right. Well, in that case, I'll give a quick intro to our speaker, and then we'll get going here. Our speaker this month is Aslan French. And Aslan is a designer and traditionally trained studio artist who lives in Austin, Texas, who has been experimenting with neural networks in a fine art context since 2015. And so, obviously the AI revolution or devolution or whatever you believe, pro or con on the whole endless debates on it, is everything everyone is talking about right now, from large language models to diffusive models, etc. This tech is, whether or not you think it's overhyped or not, it certainly represents a kind of paradigm shift and transformation in a lot of these technologies. And we all are in this space of uncertainty of where is this all going, what does this all mean? And I've had a lot of conversations about this with Aslan, because we're both like philosophy geeks, and I figured I always love his takes on this stuff, and so I figured, and as I always tell people, Aslan, apologies if I make you blush, but I always tell people, you hear repeatedly people say, AI art takes no skill. That is not true, because I've seen Aslan's AI art, and it's way better than almost everything else everybody's making, so it absolutely takes skill. So I figured Aslan would be a very interesting person to come talk to us about AI art and his thoughts on it. And he proposed to me that he's basically going to kind of give us a history survey of the topic, of this stuff didn't just come from nowhere. What is the history of generative art, over the last 50 years? And how did we now get to where we are now? And can we learn something from this history so we can have more informed debates about what this tech means for society and what we should do about it? So without further ado, take it away, Aslan.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so welcome to the talk. Thank you all for patience with the technical issues. Like Kevin said, this stuff has been a lot in the news lately, so I want to talk about the broader historical art history stuff. So I'm going to start by, what am I not talking about today? I'm not going to teach anything about how neural networks work or any technical aspects of how they're implemented. I'm not going to talk about making money off of AI art or legal or political implications surrounding that stuff. And I'm not going to be talking about the AI business or the future of AI business. I do have a statement of ethos on my Medium blog if you want to check that out. That covers some of those topics. But what I am going to be talking about is the history of the phrase generative art and the people who use that phrase and what we can learn about the way they use this phrase to understand creativity and our present moment better. So why is this important? This is important because there's a lot of hype, but there's a longer human history here that I think is worth people knowing. So one thing also I'll say is I'm not an expert. And a lot of people in here are not experts. Some people in here actually probably are experts. I know at least multiple people here who know more about many parts of this subject than I do in this room. But I want to start with, does anybody not know what a neural network is? Everybody knows what a neural network is?
Why don't you just give the very simple definition?
Quick.
People hear that.
Quick definition, neural network is a way, it's like an architecture. You have input, you get output. Instead of procedurally, training every little part of the program, you train it using basically things like backpropagation techniques like that, where you move a big node of mathematical functions to gradually have their weight set so that it gets the right answer more often than it gets the wrong answer. Okay, and this is sort of similar to the way our human brains are structured. I'm going to give a little background. Oh wait, also, I'm not going to be really actually talking that much about AI, just because I think conversations about AI get way too often it's like imprecise, and people get into arguments about a bunch of like random stuff. So I'm really going to be focusing on neural networks and their place in generative art history. And I'll talk more about what generative art is in the future. I'm going to start with my background real quick. Also, warning, some very old, cringy things I drew are coming up. I started making digital art as a kid because I didn't have like access to art supplies. I grew up in rural Texas. You can see there in the corner that little superhero looking dude. This is my first digital illustration I made in MS Paint when I was like 10 or something. I did digital art, then I went to school for studio art. I studied oil painting. I had a big interest in figurative art. Post-college, I got a job as a designer. And I went back to doing mostly digital art. And I also had like near the end of college and then after college I had an interest in glitch art, which glitch art has some like overlapping history with generative art. But by and large, the thing to take away from here is like I'm a painter. I don't generally call myself a generative artist. But in 2015, I saw Google Deep Dream and I was like, this stuff is amazing. I had an existing interest in optical illusions and understanding subjectivity. Deep Dream was interesting to me because it gave a visual representation of the software that our brains are kind of running on, kind of. Some of y'all might already be familiar with Deep Dream. This is a thing trained on a banana, and it's given random noise, and that looks more banana-ish. It just over iterations of basically running the neural network the way it normally works. In categorizing stuff, you run it backwards, it makes an image look more and more like whatever it's been trained on. So you have this is the sort of beginning of generative neural network stuff. I started experimenting with Deep Dream, but then very quickly went over to neural style transfer. I learned how to use Linux in order to start using this stuff on my own machine. So some background what style transfer is, because most of what people talk about these days is text-to-image models in generative AI and art. But style transfer, you start with a content image and you get a style image, and then you make the content image look like the style image. So you have the content image is this building here. You take a Van Gogh painting and you make the building look in the same kind of style as the neural network, as the Van Gogh thing.
Is that hard to do? Is that hard to do?
It's, the tools, the interface for it is not very difficult, but I didn't train any of this stuff. Like people with PhDs have all these things. People with, other PhDs have set up the tools. So you can run, at this point, you can run most of these things on your phone. At the time, I was running it off my computer because I wanted to have more direct control of my inputs. But yeah, it's not too hard. I have a guide that's now super outdated I wrote for artists on the subject, but I can give resources if anybody's interested in knowing about how to get started with this stuff.
I have a kind of stupid question. You mentioned on the last slide how it's like trying to create something out of noise. If you just let it keep going, would it?
It just keeps on going and going and going. It does like weird stuff. Like people have experimented.
So it's almost like stopping it halfway through or something.
Yeah, you could just technically let it keep on going, and you'll see sometimes people make work that it will. They'll do things like after each iteration, they'll like make the picture smaller or make the picture bigger, and then you get like these zoom in effects, or like people have. Anyway, it's just sort of like expanding off of the last In the same way that like text LLMs are like trying to find the next word, this is trying to make the thing look the next iteration of that image.
I was just curious.
Yeah. So so style transfer was interesting to me. 2016 to 2018, I experimented with what I call neural fusion portraits. And the way that these worked was that I took one content image and then took a bunch of different style images, produced all these different variations, and then I took them into Photoshop, layered them over each other, masked out different parts of different ones I wanted, and then did some touch-ups by hand in order to kind of like pull the picture together and make it more coherent. 2018 to 2019, I experimented a little bit with like abstraction and less post-processing work. This is probably the closest I've ever come to like treating this stuff like generatively, which is basically just me making a bunch of stuff and like being like, oh, that looks cool. 2020 to 2021, I shifted to using Colab. Google Colab is like a cloud service that makes it really easy to run these things. I used early open source text-to-image model called Clip plus GAN that I used from Copied Notebook, and this is really not in many ways like intended as art. It was just like me fiddling around and seeing like what the limits are. 2022, I started using Midjourney, and over the past year have generated probably, I don't know, several tens of thousands of images easily. And then I've developed some of these pieces of work into coherent sort of series, and I have this piece here that's a triptych that I collaged from different outputs together as part of a larger series, and I've exhibited that at a couple of art events here in Austin. So enough about me. Just giving kind of background, here's the question: what is generative art? Or rather, what do I mean when I say generative art? I think it's really important to make sure that it's very clear I'm not defining generative art. It's a word, it's used by a bunch of different people, a lot of different ways. There's some debate about how people use the word. I'm just describing how I use the word. And I'm also not a particularly good expert to be even talking about generative art because I have a figurative background. Like I said, I don't really use it as a generative tool. I mostly use it to produce assets I create other stuff with. Honestly, you can learn most of what I'm going to talk about by reading the wiki article on generative art because that's mostly what I did. So I do encourage, because there's a lot of information that's in there that I'm not going to cover. But I do think I'm going to try to bring my own perspective on this as an additive, and I think it will be valuable. So I'm going to start with some quotes. Here's some quotes. Adrian Ward: generative art is a term given to work which stems from concentrating on the processes involved in producing an artwork, usually, although not strictly automated, by the use of a machine or computer, or by using mathematic or pragmatic instruction to define the rules by which such artwork is executed. The term generative art and computer art have been used in tandem and more or less interchangeably since the very earliest days. Philip Galanter: generative art refers to any art practice where the artist creates a process such as a set of natural language rules, a computer program, a machine, or other procedural invention, which is then set into motion with some degree of autonomy, contributing to or resulting in a completed work of art. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about some precursors. These are some things that are not called generative art by most people, but they inform people's understanding of the use of the term, and they help illustrate some of its principles. So first we have Islamic mosaic. Islamic mosaic is very famous for its sophistication geometrically. In Islam, there's a tendency towards not having figurative work. You don't pick Muhammad, generally you don't pick, Allah. So there's a tendency in Islamic art to have a lot of abstraction. And this is very sophisticated abstraction that goes back centuries. Abstraction's not just a modern thing. It's not just something some guys in France invented in the 40s. It is a thing that has been part of art for a very long time. Knot work is also an interesting way to look at generative, or the precursors to generative art. Actually, of these images, the two on the more right-hand side are actually from tutorials on generating knot work. Because if you Google knot work, it's also probably Google knowing I've been writing this thing. But a lot of these, articles you'll find are actually of people explaining the mathematical qualities of knots, because knots are very mathematical. For instance, there's a whole field of math called knot theory, and you can see here, I just think it's funny, there's the unknot, which is like a 0. Instead of having a decimal system, you have a knot. I don't know if it's like I said, not a mathematician, but
I mean, essentially, this is an application of group theory.
Yeah.
You have a set and operations on the basis members of the set.
right, yeah. So knots are really cool that you can use math to describe them. So here's some attempts at understanding mathematically. Understanding color mathematically. Knots are pretty cool, but most art obviously doesn't feature them. Most visual art features color. Newton provided our definition of the 7 prismatic colors in the late 1600s. Newton believed a lot of really wacky stuff about math and religion. I recommend checking that out on your own time.
It's fun.
Yeah, he thought he was immortal and stuff. He's a very interesting person. Part of that, the reason why we have 7 colors traditionally in the West is because he was trying to fit it to the major scale. So there's an interest going back a long time about like the similarities between color and sound in music. Also, for instance, one of the impacts you can see of his obsession with trying to make these things parallel each other is indigo. Which indigo, like people like, you probably don't really think about indigo that much these days. That's because it's just blue. I mean, it's just another kind of blue. It's not like really that. It's not a fancy color, but he needed a 7th color for the prismatic scale. So he was like, indigo, that's the...
So I spent a few months on this particular experiment from the optics. When he says indigo, it's what we mean as blue.
Yeah.
Sort of the words are shifted and changed. If you do this experiment, you actually will see 7 bands. It wasn't to add a vowel.
Right.
And we still don't fully understand why people see 7 bands as that particular number. We don't have a theory that predicts that yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because blue, what do you call blue is more like cyan.
Exactly.
Right.
So the bands in Newton's experiment here are red, orange, yellow, green.
Well, it's Roy D. Biv, literally.
Well,
Right.
it's in modern terms, it would be like green, cyan,
Right.
blue,
Right.
purple.
Right. Mapping into what we would call them, yes.
Right. Yeah, and so this is this is kind of like, we have Isaac Newton in the 1600s. Then in the 1800s we had people like Goethe and Otto Runge who were trying to come up with color wheels. Color wheels are sort of another way of trying to understand mathematics space, to understand color in terms of space. And spatial relationship. A lot of this stuff is outdated now, which is why we use things like the CIE, which came out in the 1930s, and still used to this day by smart lighting and stuff. If you have a Philips Hue, it uses CIE as an industrial standard for defining the color space of light in relation to subjective. It's like weighted so that areas like green and cyan, where our eyes have more sensitivity towards for distinguishing, have more mathematical space to be stored, essentially. Okay, yeah. Also, I have a thing, color space in general is really interesting. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, that's just the mathematical treatment of space. I have an article on my blog where I talk about, I use color space to explain the concept of latent space. Latent space is a key concept in the mathematics of neural networks. Okay, so this is starting to get interactive.
We like interactive here.
Yes. So we're going to talk about Exquisite Corpse is a system of rules that people play in order to get some sort of result that's not totally within their control. Surrealism was a post-World War I movement that focused on tapping into the unconscious mind for expression. Part of these artists' practice was to create games that could be played to produce works. For instance, we have the Exquisite Corpse, and the way that works is you fold up a piece of paper into 3s, or 4s, or 5s, or how many of you want, and you draw something on one of these little pieces, and you mark on the little edge where, you probably can't see this from here, but you mark where the lines, open-ended lines go, and then you pass it to the next person. They can see where the lines have started, and they have to draw something that goes to the next side, and then they pass it to someone else, and then they draw, and then you get a weird little thing here, whatever it is. So, and if you don't want to, if you feel self-conscious about drawing or anything like that, don't worry, but also like, you don't have to do this. But I'm going to pass this around. I've already started a couple of these, and if you can like pass these to the people behind you when you.
I mean, I got one of his online candles. It's like Susan Corpse.
Amazing.
I can't
let y'all have this. Okay, so.
Aslan, do you have pens?
Yes, I do. I haven't
Everybody
bought
has
it.
to play if they don't want to. But
Yes.
we encourage you to play if you
Yeah,
want to.
I haven't purchased a pencil in like 10 years, so some of those erasers are
I'm actually going to go to the rest of the things. I'll be right back. I'm sure you've got it.
Yeah.
No, it looks like you want to pass.
Would y'all like to do one? Okay. And I'll pass these to this one as well. I'll just pass these out. If people want to do this, just grab this and hold it.
Do you have a pencil? No, you got these.
You just fold it into threes.
Do I get one?
Yes.
And I'm gonna fold it through?
Yes, and I think that's probably more than enough, but if we have to double up and we'll pass it around. I'm going to continue talking while everyone's doing this. So. Yeah, okay, so that's how, is everybody clear on kind of the instructions? And we'll continue this?
Once you finish drawing on a side,
Yeah.
you
You fold it back over so that they can't see it, and you make sure that the lines that are open-ended on the other side. So, and I think, so. Yes.
Okay, so where do I, oh, that's what I don't.
Does it have to be a figure like that, or can it be anything?
Anything. Anything you make with lines. Well, you could also make it without lines if you wanted to, but you do have to end in lines. So just start, those are your starting points.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, I got that idea. Cool. And you're starting one. Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, so that's a surrealist example of a surrealist game. The surrealists were interested in trying to push people to think about the unconscious or use the unconscious as a source source for art. So Jean Arp is a Dadaist who also was interacted with the surrealists and had overlap with their work. The way Arp made these works is they took these pieces of paper, they held them over a thing, they let them fall down, and wherever they fell, that was the composition. Probably kind of similar to what you've heard with Pollock did with paint. So I'm just going to read this quote because I find it interesting. These pictures are realities in themselves without meaning or cerebral intention. We allow the elementary and spontaneous to react in full freedom. Since the disposition of the planes and the proportions and colors of these planes seem to depend purely on chance, I declare that these works, like nature, were ordered according to the laws of chance. Chance being for me merely a limited part of the unfathomable, I practice this word, raison d'etre?
Raison d'etre.
Yeah, there we go. Close. Of an order inaccessible in its totality. So all these things eventually after World War II started leading to this thing that a lot of people call international abstraction. It's really better to call it more like European and American rich guy abstraction. There's not like, it's one of those cases where international is sort of modified. But lots of these movements were coming out of Europe and America: constructivism, supremativism, Dadaists, Bauhaus, synchronism. But the commonality that keeps them there, I mean, they had like all sorts of different philosophical manifestos and political manifestos, and reasons for why they were making what they were making, but they're all this like big tendency towards getting rid of figurative work and towards pure abstraction. Kandinsky is a very famous example. He was very interested in, he called his color harmonies, and apparently had like synesthesia. So again, there's this like crossover between music and color that was very important. And then you have, Kandinsky is pretty painterly, but Mondrian is a lot more geometric here. And this kind of reflects a tendency of the international abstract artists to use grids and mathematical principles like the golden ratio to systematically compose their art. So you can think of these like, this is very similar to the earlier stuff that had been going on with color, where people were like, color theory. We're trying to understand why colors look the way they are. Why does a color look good with another color? And a lot of this was trying to understand the same thing on a XYZ spatial level. Like how do these things compose together? Joseph Albers is a very important person because he bridges the gap between the art world and generative art. He was a teacher at the famous Bauhaus school. Bauhaus is famous and basically created our modern ideas of design. And he bridged that kind of gap from the traditional painterly fine art world to commercial industrial design. He wrote some famous works on color theory, which I'll just pass this out if anybody wants to look at this. It's a copy of his color theory work. There are some illustrations in the back. But yeah, this is his work, Homage to a Square. Homage to the Square. And this is another work by him, and I'm just showing it because I think it looks cool. So computers get involved. There isn't a clear dividing line for what defines generative art. Like I said, a lot of people have used it a lot of different ways, so I'm not going to draw a line. I'm just going to say this is where computers get involved. Ben F. Blavatsky made these pictures by taking photographs of oscilloscopes through colored gels. He's credited with inventing the very first computer graphics. These works were in 1953, which is about 5 years before Tennis for Two, which is the first video game, and is credited as often as one of the first computer graphics.
It's either that or Space War.
Yeah. Do you know which way Space War is? I forget.
It's like early 60s.
Okay. Yeah. So this is.
And it's played on an oscilloscope.
Right. Yeah. So he's often credited as being the first computer graphics guys. Interesting. He never went to college. He was a Army veteran who was a sign painter and draftsman before the war. Came back after World War II, could not climb ladders anymore because he'd been injured, and so he became sort of a tinkerer. From my reading, he just did a lot of stuff. He had a knack for math. These images were first published in a Israeli mathematics journal called Scriptica Mathematica. It's interesting because there's very little mention of interaction between Ben's work and later generative artists. All these other generative artists are more like the painters who came before. They're people from academies in Europe and America. This guy was doing his own thing. He cited a lot of contemporary artists in some of his work. But from what I can tell, he is not generally taught as part of art history. I found my old textbook from like a decade ago, and there's no mention of him in here. Most of his work survives because it was preserved by computer nerds who were like computer business tech guys who sort of like archived it as part of computer history, not as part of art history. I included him in part because I used him to make this shirt. I just used that image as an image prompt and then Hawaiian print. But I liked how it came out, and I thought he's an interesting contrast to the rest of the institutional art world. And also a good example of like what is maybe not generative art, because his works were not, there's no algorithm involved like that you can trace back. He took pictures of a live event and it's not reproducible, which a lot of people like think of generative art in terms of it being reproducible. This is Vera Molnar's work. She is kind of more, I think, what people think of when they talk about generative art. Randomness plays a huge role in her work. She used a pen plotter to draw it. So a pen plotter is basically like a 3D printer. I mean, it's like a little robot arm. It's like a CNC that moves an actual physical pen around. So you can program in a bunch of information into it, and it will move the arm X, Y, etc. Lay it down, stick it up. A lot of generative artists were known for using pen plotters, so she's a pretty good example of that stuff. I'm going to now talk to you about how I got introduced to generative art and the reason I find it interesting, basically. When I was in college, I had to write a paper about an abstract modern artist, and I chose this guy, Yeverall, because he was listed as a digital artist, and I like digital art, so I was like, hey, I'll do this guy. I wasn't a huge fan of abstract work. You know, I came from like a figurative background. I was sort of in the same camp as your uncle who doesn't like Jackson Pollock. But I thought his stuff looked cool, and so I decided to write about him. And he also did a lot of figurative work, which interested me. One of the things that really strikes me is about how he describes his art process, which I cited in my original essay for this, and I wish I could provide a direct quote from the thing, but my source for that essay was an out-of-print book that was in French, and I had to have a friend translate it for me, and now I wish I had asked her to translate it and like stick it in a text document. That's something you learn 10 years on. You're like, oh, when am I going to access this information again? But anyway, so this is his piece, Mona Lisa Synthesized. And Yeverall talks about his work very explicitly in terms of the scientific. He talks about it as in terms of like variables and permutations on those variables. So think about it, if you have like a bunch of petri dishes and you put a different chemical in each one, that is slightly different chemical or a different strain of bacteria in each one. What you're creating is, and you're iterating over, is you're trying to find like what's the best formula of dishwashing soap, or what's the best vaccine, or whatever you're testing. That's kind of like, this is the scientific process, taking the space and trying to tweak the variables, permute on each of those variables so that you can do something. So in this case, you have a single image but many permutations on it. Yeverall made this stuff by taking an image, putting it into a computer, using algorithms to transform that image, and then he would take vinyl and he would cut it out, and so there would be no brush strokes. So it's not printed, it is all handmade and put together, but it is not painted or printed in the way that we would normally think about it. I think this is kind of an interesting evolution on the sort of idealism, philosophical idealism of the abstract artists that came before. International abstract artists were very concerned with these concepts of like underlying reality, in the same way that surrealists were interested in the unconscious, and the Dadaists were like the laws of chance. They're all trying to use math or something like math to understand what is an underlying aspect of reality. And so you can think of this as like the ideal in traditional Platonic philosophy. The word eidos is Greek, and it would be translated as idol, idea, or ideal, and it's important for the history of Western philosophy. But it also, here you see that same kind of idea visualized, where you have many different particular instantiations of the same image. There's something here that Yeverall is trying to get at as a underlying, or something more than just like the singular image. There's something shared between them. They're all of an image. We see some similarity here, even going back to Joseph Albers, where he's doing these variations on a square, which is, again, that kind of scientific process. Joseph Albers was very interested in the subjective experience of color and how color pulled off of each other. Nowadays, in modern visual stuff, we talk about oppositional, things called oppositional competition, where your eyes are seeing colors differently based upon the colors next to them because of the way your photoreceptors work. But again, it's that whole idea of variation and permutation and combinatorial experimentation. And so back to here, you can see, there we go. I don't even know if they knew who each other were, but that titling is very similar. This insight came back to me as important as I was doing my own experience with neural networks, because obviously you're doing this kind of same process. And I used this test image for style transfer, and I have like several hundred of these with this skull test image, and you can see, let me see if I can pull, you can see like this was like an octopus. This is not, most people put stuff in a style transfer, they put like Van Goghs or try to make things look like paintings, but I thought it was interesting to just like put random crap in there. You have like bamboo. This was like an illustration of a leopard. This is like a Hawaiian print shirt. So there's just a lot of stuff that this stuff can be used to create. And I've also continued sort of experimenting with that with Midjourney, in that I use the test phrase rodeo clown goblin gin, which I have handouts for, which is kind of a joke, because they're like, my joke for this is like once AR makes stuff so plentiful that it's like I can literally not give these things away. So they're printed out JPEGs that you are welcome to have one. Okay, so what's the point of all this stuff? Okay, so there's a lot more about generative art that can be talked about. I only talked about a few of these things, and a lot more, I would even say like more mainstream examples of this stuff. But I wanted, like Vera, for instance, is like way more mainstream. There's like more generative artists within like institutional academic art that people talk about, and they have a lot of interesting stuff to think on. But the reason why I really wanted to focus on this concept of Yuval's concept of permutation through variables is because I think it's useful to trying to understand what generative art means and what we mean when we say something is generative. We can think of generative art as a way of moving through a space. So you have color space, you have XYZ space. In the case of the laws of chance, you have possibility space. And that is what neural networks are. They are attempts at modeling space. And we call this model that is used latent space, because latent space is basically a mathematical model of our world. And so this exploration of the world is not new to art. It's very old. It's what art has been doing since the beginning in many ways. And we can see a continuous through line in our social practice from the past to now. So that's pretty much it. I'll just say as bonus stuff I had to cut was stuff about Pollock and the overlap between his work and fractals, because his stuff was in the 90s, they did fractal analysis, and also with resin pour paintings, which I'm sure you've seen on social media. Resin pour paintings are sort of like a generative process themselves, but instead of being processed by a computer, they're being processed by the laws of chance, the physical laws of our reality. And then also Duchamp, who made a toilet famous. So, if you've not heard that story, he's an interesting guy. But that's pretty much it for it. Yay!
Q&A. Does anybody have questions for us?
And we can do Q&A, and while that's happening, I will pass our stuff around for people. So we have questions?
Yeah, question. Raise your hand and I'll call on you. We definitely have questions. This is a big room, so I hope we have questions. Yeah.
So I'm really interested in the idea of framing this as like an algorithm, like the Arabic mosaics. Are there any other examples of like strictly just using math and like using math and particular pattern repetition?
Mm-hmm.
Like especially in like in pre-Renaissance or pre-Renaissance, pre-modern art. Is Are
Yeah.
there any other examples of that that you know of?
Yeah, well, when people are doing math with Mosaic, they're not necessarily like sitting down and calculating everything. I mean, their brains are helping them navigate that space. I mean, there's, Mosaic pattern work goes, all over history. You have almost any kind of weaving can be used to describe mathematically. Early automated looms are the basis of modern memory systems because we used punch cards originally to mathematically encode, where the machine was supposed to punch, which holes. So pretty much anything with pattern, you can use math to describe. So, and Escher was very famous for doing tessellation, exploration with tessellation, which is a mathematical field of its own. So, if anybody wants a free JPEG, feel free.
Yeah, I'll take a free JPEG. You want a free JPEG? I'll think about it. All right, we'll come back. Well, I like
You can also like chop them up and spin them around.
take one, pass them down.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, the Vitruvius man, he was talking about math and the Renaissance. So that famous picture of the guy spread out close in the circle was an attempt to rationalize the proportions of man to mathematical and holy contexts.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a question there? Did I see him? Oh, there's one.
I have a question that's, I'm not sure could be answered very easily, but.
Well, you can try it. There's a lot of smart people in this room.
I wonder, is anybody aware of kind of speculation of where we are now with generative art? Like say a few decades ago where people are already surmising that, we would be able to have models generated by computers that be as sophisticated as they are now. And I guess to piggyback on that question, like what are people forecasting as possibilities as things continue to evolve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the generative art project is I think mostly a fine art movement. It has had some effect on stuff outside that movement in the sense that a lot of NFTs had some generative component to them, and there's been people working on generative design using systems of rules and architecture to construct or figure out if you've ever seen those things that look kind of like organic-ish and they have all those people make a lot of stuff with 3D printing where they have all these strange organic shapes, and they're basically telling a computer we need a stressor here, we need a load-bearing column here, and we need this part to hold up this part, and then the computer just generates a metallic lattice that then is able to hold up to that form, and they're using generative processes for that. But for most people, I don't think generative art has a lot of direct impact in certain ways. It's very restricted to the art world. Generative AI is different in the fact that it's obviously coming into people's lives very quickly. But yeah.
I mean, one thing I can offer you is certainly not necessarily in the context of generative art, but certainly in the thing that AI represents of the mass production of art. People have been thinking about this for a very long time, ever since the invention of photography. Probably the most famous essay ever written on the topic is a famous essay from the 1930s from the philosopher Walter Benjamin called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. So yes, very smart people have been thinking about if art becomes mechanistic and easy to produce, what does that mean for art? They've been thinking about that for a century, basically. So these are not new. Smart people have been seeing where this is going for a very long time.
Yeah, and a lot of generative artists come out of, or in reaction to things around that same time, their contemporary time, where they're oh, I'm making a computer draw this for me, but because it's using a pen plotter and it's not printing it, that's the important thing. Or there's a lot of generative artists will play with having some kind of human input as the spark of the thing. But a lot of that is sort of, I think, it's people playing with the concepts of, but not really being straightforward about how this is directly, no one's talking about oh, the mechanical loom put this region of England out of business, all the tradesmen are gone, that kind of stuff is sort of the background noise for a lot of this stuff. Andy Warhol famously called his studio the art factory, and he made a lot of stuff that he didn't make. He just paid people to make it. And like that kind of concept of like, you see people being like, oh, art, how does art in the age of mechanical reproduction survive? So generative art is one way which people like explore it as part of that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think how most of what we shown was generative still art, right? And then generative video is obviously rapidly evolving as well. And you have generative 3D modeling, eventually generative reality, I guess, with VR and AR and stuff. Will be interesting to see how that is.
Yeah, I mean, and the stuff that, I follow because it's relevant to our digital celebrities' interests. I mean, I think it's both very exciting and very scary, a lot of the implications. I mean, yeah, you're gonna run into issues, I mean, literally, people don't know what's real and what's fake. It's been building and it's just getting worse and worse. You're going to, it's only a matter of time until there's a major geopolitical event from a fake video of some important person doing something that will look absolutely real to everyone. And people will fall into their ideological camps and just believe it or deny it, even though it's all made up. And I don't know what that means for society, but it's kind of scary.
I will say, I mean, I do think that's not like something people should ignore, but I think in some ways people forget that people get convinced of insane things all the time just with like JPEGs.
Yeah, they don't need that. Like, that's a good point.
Yeah, there's a really great guy on YouTube I highly recommend named Captain Disillusion. He's an extremely talented VFX artist who's been making debunking videos for he's like an old YouTuber. Like he has videos in 2040p, if that tells you anything. Like he's an old YouTuber, and his whole thing has been, oh, I'm a VFX artist and I'll explain like how this hoax video works, and I'll like break it down and do like a VFX breakdown. How did they make this effect? And he recently came out with a video where he was like, I've been doing this for like 14 years, and videos that I literally did stuff on 14 years ago are still going viral on TikTok and still going, like there's just not, human beings are easy to trick. They're like,
I mean, and also, you don't need, technically you don't need this modern tech. I mean, long before Photoshop, there's the infamous photo where Stalin kept erasing people he killed out of the photo.
Right.
People have been lying with tech for a very long time.
Sherlock Holmes's author, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who's like super into the occult, he got fooled by two little English girls to believe fairies were real because he was like super into the occult, and they were just like paper cutout dolls that they took photographs next to, and he was like completely convinced that like they had finally found proof that fairies were real. So he also had a bet with Houdini that would, go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say he also had a bet with Houdini that whoever died first was gonna tell a secret word to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's wife to see if there was an afterlife, and of course Houdini died first, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's wife did not know the word. So, if you want proof, or at least not a magic fairy world, so.
No more questions? Oh yeah.
Aslan, can you tell us about your shirts, your collection?
Oh yeah, shirts are fun.
Some shirts.
I got a lot of shirts. I just pass them around to people. Please give them back. They're not for sale. They have I've washed them all. So.
Very considerate.
Yeah. Well, I do actually. If anybody wants these cotton ones, I've got them too small. So if you wear a medium, like a small medium, here. I don't know how to pass this around. So. I use
figuring out email stuff. Basically, I'm in the process of cleaning out all the cruft in the Google Drive, and once I've actually purged dead emails and all that fun stuff, I may be starting to think about.
And if anybody has questions about a specific pattern and wants to know,
we're getting there.
As a joke, it's more fun.
I know, but I also am serious. Just very busy, so everything moves incredibly slow. I'm like, yeah,
I know, but you keep reminding me to remind you.
no, I appreciate it. Yes. I actually am making sort of infrastructural progress and all this stuff. It's just so hard to find the time these days. As I'm sure running the new oil, you appreciate all too well. I'm always
I set up a new server and crashed last night.
I know, whenever being in the privacy piece of that, I'm always just like, man, you worked so hard on that side of the BS you're always having to deal with. There's. Well, same. I'm appreciative of everything you do, but I'm just like, yeah, we can't afford it. Not consistently anyway.
was more testing stuff today.
I think, yeah, whenever you're ready, Aslan, I got another question.
Yes.
So it's not so much a question, but just stating two things. So first thing is like the way I started thinking about using coding to generate art was with Python, using like a recursive method. Just simple, just draw like a square x, y axis, right? And then next recursion you divide it by half. So it kind of creates a smaller square and a smaller square. So that's that. However, I have gotten like farther more into it stuff, and I just wanted to say that I don't know a bunch of these, but I do think that like the best way, maybe not the best way, but like a cool way, a really cool way to do it was to be use different tools. Like the first one you said, I wrote a very different direction. Like the Google one, like the Big Dreams, like mixing that with Midjourney, and mixing it with like the city.
Yeah, I kind of did that. This shirt here, the image prompt used for this was actually a generative piece someone else had made that was generative work. And it was just like pure abstract, and I was like wildflower, botanical illustration, and it made this thing, which I thought was really cool. And this is made from, the oscilloscope image that Ben Lipowski made. So yeah, I mean, definitely like, there's a lot of interesting ways that you can pass these different pieces and techniques back and forth between each other.
Yeah, I think that would be.
Yeah.
We got more questions? Back there and then there. Yeah.
Aslan, I wonder if you've looked at all at what art criticism is doing and like art historians are doing as they study digital art and the question of quality. Because they've really labored for centuries to have it not just be a subjective business, like I prefer this, you prefer that. They've really tried to move past that to establish art criticism and art history as disciplines that have aesthetics and aesthetic judgment as the center of what they're doing. In this space, do you think anybody can make a case for what constitutes quality beyond just subjectivity?
Yeah.
Other than me liking what he does.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean that's a good question. A lot of the work of the abstract, I know you, Owens. We know each other, but I know you like phenomenology. So actually, you'd be very interested in a lot of the international abstract artists because a lot of them were trying to tap into pure subjectivity as this concept, where they were like, what is the phenomenological experience of color? How do we talk about, how do we place these things in relationship to each other in a way that's like, taking a subjective thing and objectifying it, essentially. But like in terms of generative art, I think the more sophisticated theory stuff is in the 90s. You have people like the Algorists. That's kind of like where a lot of generative art as a term, it had been used previously for a lot of different stuff, but it really came to fore in the 90s when you have a bunch of artists based in Milan who kind of had this yearly thing called GenerativeArt.com. It was like an art festival, and that's where a lot of like more sophisticated theory. But one reason why I don't emphasize as much of that is because I just think overall stuff is more like very interesting as like a broader way of understanding generative art as like a scientific process or as a movement through space process. But also because the algorists are so focused on the algorithmic part, which is a lot less relevant for neural network art because there is an algorithm-ish, like there's a model, but there's not like you're not writing, majority of people who engage with neural network art are not training their own models, so.
Yeah, it almost is more declarative neural network art, it's less
Yes.
imperative.
Yes, yeah.
What is that?
It's a programming thing. It basically says you say what you want without how you're going to do it is declarative.
How can critics establish what quality is? That's what I'm really getting at here.
Yeah, I mean, if you mean in the larger philosophical sense for all art.
Aesthetic sense.
Yeah. I mean, art is an intersubjective process, right? So it's like, how do you determine the definition of a word? It's how people use the word. So I would say I find things personally interesting about different kinds of artists. And part of why I can find those things interesting is also because I have like a background that allows me to understand what they're even talking about or what is the purpose of this thing. If you don't know very much about neural network art, you could look at you could look at a bunch of different stuff and it would all look the same to you, you know. So I think a lot of it's just like, it's hard to give a objective answer to this thing because you're talking about something that's like, it's at best transjective, but it's probably more intersubjective. You know, it's a thing that is understood through community, process, right?
I actually have a follow-up based on what Owen said, sort of two questions that sort of branch off from that, which is one, you mentioned that you used to be the grumpy uncle who didn't like Jackson Pollock. What changed so that now you're making art in that style? And two, I guess trying to establish a theory of aesthetics of generative or algorithm art, are there like different camps where there's one camp that says it is the aesthetic, like phenomenological experience of the subjective subject of the output, how it affects the human being, or is there a camp who's like, what it actually generates is not the real art, but maybe like the beauty of the algorithm is
right.
the art.
Yeah. So that's what I mean by like it's a intersubjective process and it depends on your knowledge, right? Because I can like look at a piece of code and be like, oh, that's like very elegantly written. I like the way that they wrote this. It's in a single line, or I like there's an aesthetic, and that aesthetic is built up through the process of engagement with the medium. So if your only experience with painting is seeing paintings on a wall, you're not going to understand necessarily why someone says, oh, that's really cool what they did here, because you have no experience of knowing, like, is that hard or is that easy? Is that, what does that mean? What's its context? It's like, I don't know if someone's good at speaking Chinese, because I don't speak Chinese. So, I could hear two people talking in Chinese and I would be like, I don't know if this person's good at it or bad at it because I don't know the language. So all these different things are languages. That doesn't mean that they're, I think it's meaningful to talk about what do you think is good or bad in art, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it can be talked out without any sort of reference point. It has to have some kind of reference point to, language essentially. I would argue.
And what shifted your own views on this, I guess?
Because of Yuval's thing, I was like, oh, it's just experimentation. And then I realized, oh, all this stuff that I already know about like graphic design is like stuff that I'd been taught graphic design as graphic design, but graphic design is a product of experimentation. People did not understand this thing looks better than this thing until they like took this thing and iterated a bunch of different variations of it. So understanding art more as a scientific process, an exploratory process, and then also just being like, if someone wants splatter paints on their wall, I'm not gonna, it doesn't really affect me.
Yes.
Well, what I noticed with creative art in general is that it pulls a lot from the rules of graphic design, because like for instance, visual hierarchy. One of them is contrast. So you'll see there's usually a lot, it focuses on contrast to get you to pay attention to something. It has a very limited color palette usually that's kind of like a classic color palette. It really pulls from a lot because it's pulling from the successful art that's it has breadth, and it's like just sifting through it and say, aha, I see a pattern, and that pattern it just happens to be built into good graphic design anyhow. And talking about your point, I really enjoyed Richard Schiff's book called Doubt. He's an art historian, and so he talked about doubt as being a tool for art historians to look at any kind instead of making those aesthetic decisions, instead of making doubt part of the process. Those are the 2 points I wanted to make, because I've been challenging my students to learn the techniques of visual hierarchy in their own work, and then just watching AI use it, and just seeing it and identifying it instead of just, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, there's a pattern there that's pulled from all these successful graphic artists, and it's giving back.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valuable insight, because one of the things I think is worth interrogating about this stuff is like, I look at Midjourney and I was just saying like, that looks cool, but also I think that looks cool because I was raised on digital art from the internet. Like, I was taught by people who were the people who ended up being used to train these things. So like, Yeah, I think it. It's like years ago, every movie poster was like blue and orange, and that's because blue and orange are contrasting colors.
Took over.
Yeah, right. Yeah, colorists took over technology. And it's not because blue and orange is like the superior, objective, perfect. But it's because there's like pragmatic reasons about how human vision works. So some of these models are reflections of the visual processes that human beings have, but they're also a reflection of culture and what we call beautiful. If you put the word normal-looking person into Midjourney, it does not produce a normal-looking person. Yeah,
I know what I think that's the quote of the night.
Yeah, but it produces an ideal, right? Which is that's that ideal, the abstract, the underlying reality, the thing that all these international artists were also trying to get at, And for instance, Midjourney specifically, part of their success is they didn't just put stuff in. Everything, I believe, I remember reading this, I could be wrong, but it has an aesthetic score. So they don't just say, they didn't just feed it a bunch of photographs and had them tagged with metadata. Every image also is rated on how good an image it is. Which again, who defines what is a good image? It depends on who you are. So.
And I guess this whole conversation, just thinking from my own perspective as a web designer, I'm actually now thinking, so there's, speaking of design, obviously web design, there's design principles. Probably the most popular one right now is a school called material design, which if you want to know what that looks like, look at any of Google's websites. It's highly influenced by material design that comes out of more traditional print design, translated to the internet. And there's a good point that a lot of these generative systems have been trained on specific kinds of digital files, JPEGs, PNGs, etc. And I'm now thinking, what if you trained one of them on HTML, CSS rendering, basically? What would it suddenly decide is good design? Would it all be material based now, because that's what you trained it on, basically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now it'll go back to GeoCities.
GeoCities.
So, what's your tool of choice at the moment?
I use mostly Midjourney. Yeah, but if I'm
laser focused on using that? Are you laser focused on using that particular tool?
It's just extremely easy, and I'm lazy. I really have to tell people this is like the equivalent of me doodling it during a meeting and stuff. So, and I don't make money off this. I get invited to an art event, and I get free drinks for a night, and force a bunch of strangers to listen to me yammer about random art history stuff, so,
In fairness, they're very interesting points. I highly encourage it.
And have you dabbled with other tools?
Yes. So I used neural transfer with Colab before, and I actually have a link. I should have included in this thing. I'll send out to, I think it's on, if you go to my statement of art ethos on my blog, I have a link to where I keep a workflowy filled with a bunch of different resources and stuff. So videos and tools and articles and stuff like that. So.
How you doing? How are you doing? You're looking at my book. I want to thank you again for looking at my book.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I have a question.
Sure.
Sort of a follow-up on Norm's. Is there anybody recognized in the field of generative art who would be considered a quote-unquote art critic?
Well, there's people like Philip Gallantier and Adrian, what's his name? There's a whole, but these are very, it's hard to say, are we talking about an academic authority? There's a bunch of people, Leonardo, MIT's.
So you read a column on generative art and critiquing the art.
Yes, yeah. So Leonardo is a journal that MIT puts out that has a bunch of articles about generative art, and there's certainly a lot of people who focus on it in an academic context, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to comment on the tools question. So actually, the value up here is, as I'm looking up, so we have East Austin Artificial Intelligence Art Users Group, or EIL. And we've been very excited about, in particular, Stable Diffusion, which is so similar to Midjourney. In particular on GitHub, there is a repository for the automatic 1111 Stable Diffusion web user interface, which is nice because it has a lot of features. It integrates some other different tools, and it also has plugin support. So there's actually a pretty big community of people who are writing plugins to expand its capabilities or to integrate it with other software.
Yeah. Josh actually probably, I feel like, is the person to talk to for that stuff, because I once Midjourney came out, I was like, I've done my open source thing. I'm like, I still run like an xCloud server for myself. It's like half broken right now, but you know, Stable Diffusion is really cool. I'm glad it exists, and they're expanding on the concept way faster than a lot, like the, what is it called, LoRa's or whatever, they create checkpoints. You can modify the model without retraining the entire thing. So there's a lot of interesting stuff people are coming out with. Assets, they're called assets, right?
Yeah, there's a whole category of assets, and within that, one of the major ones is like taking the base model that's used to generate images and fine-tuning it and producing a new checkpoint. But then there's also this intermediate one where you would have, where you only train the later layers in the neural network and produce a low-rank adaptation, or LoRa. And then there's also textual embeddings, where you take a particular style or a particular object or character or person and train an existing model to learn a new word that refers to that person or that style or that object.
Cool.
I've been like really impressed by how many things are available on automatic level. There's even like, I think there's a model called rotoscope, which is text to video. It's very early on in there, but there's like a lot in there. It's pretty cool.
And then yes, there's Civet AI is a website that has that's a lot of fun to browse for assets of different types for Stable Diffusion.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. Do we have any more questions for Aslan, especially from anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak yet? And it's fine if we're running out of questions, but yeah.
Are you aware of any models that are trained on non-Western cultural contexts, non-Western?
So most of the models have been trained on non-Western stuff. It just in the fact that a lot of it honestly is, it's interesting how these models are representative of relationships of society at large to technology, because you have things like, you know, it's either Western art or it's anime. You know, like there's a lot of anime. Yeah, there's a lot of anime out there. So if you consider anime non-Western, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do with if you know a non-Western artist name who's like in academia, then their work has probably been used, because it's just part of probably some database. But there's not anything specifically for non-Western stuff.
And I will certainly tell you that, you know, from things I've read around, like, yes, there's immense Western cultural bias of these models. Like, for instance, there was a very interesting series I saw somebody did where they asked people in various traditional historical garb from traditional cultures around the world, they asked for a picture of them smiling. But it gave all of them a very American smile in a way that the people from that actual culture, that's not how they would have smiled, basically. Any more questions? It's fine if we're running low. Yeah, and I guess what I will say is that, okay, looks like we maybe have a question. So first I want to say, let's give Aslan one more big round of applause. Has not gotten a parking voucher and still needs one. I have several more, so come find me. I'll give you one. And finally, we tend to all hang out in the bar and chat for a bit after this. Anybody who wants to join us and actually get to meet all these people and chat is welcome. Oh, and I guess we should maybe return our
let's see what these are
to finish up.
Also, I have some art worked out. I'll be showing the bar. Or
If you have any specific works for me, I will bring them up. Here's one. Thanks for bringing it. More. They ended up very
That one came out cool too.
Underground.
Giving it to you?
And then I guess quick show of hands, does anybody still need the parking voucher so I don't forget you? Oh, we need quite a few. All right, let's get them. And if we run out, I can get more. So don't worry. Take pictures in front of you. Who else? Yes, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, it's not like driving.
The biggest struggle I have with this time
So yeah, as I said, we have the room till 9, so you don't have to meet with crowd. I guess I'll say, clean up your spot, leave it how it is. We want that factory happy with us. We'll probably migrate over to the bar in the lobby. And yeah, anybody wants to learn more about it, Boston, come find me or David. And yeah, we hope you had a good time. We hope to see you next month.
Just to like, tamp down the gardens.
Yeah.
Like not that, just one person.
I was wondering if the Generative got a lot worse.
I stick around. I love how
That's a question for him, I think so.
Got it.
Or you can probably just leave it up here with his stuff. He'll make sure he gets it.
All these tickets still actually exist. So,
I figured it was some screwy too.
Oh yeah? Okay. If you can fit in them, let me go to the side.
so go ahead and use
Thank you.
ticket number 6. All the tickets are out except
Well, if you just... Alright, so which room mine should I keep 6? Alright, so I'll use 6 to get in and I don't need to do anything.
Don't use number 5. If you do,
Just text me the number.
it's numbers, you don't do that. So just pick the last one. You don't have to necessarily sit. I told you
That's probably what another thing that we're doing, we've been working with, if you don't necessarily even, do work for this, we sort of do an hour and tell them, I there's a lot of I haven't seen their new space yet. Awesome. All right, good job.
I can give you an email address.
I'll see you again. Thank you.
Oh yeah, please. I hope to see you again. I'm almost I'm aware it's a year away.
It's still the case that we're rather fast.
Look at because he's interesting, that's why. Well, yeah, I don't next to each other, chance to lab, but I'm great. We down at lab. Yeah, this makes sense. And I probably have to keep an eye out. Yeah, you guys, postcoders, student here, taking this back.
We're actually up there.
Oh, wow.
I realized it was 4 years ago. That's amazing.
I think we're lucky.
Oh, no, sorry. I'm just saying, I'm just thinking now, because I'm
So I can see how you would be able to get the economic factor. I don't know how you get a measure of how high you get, like how do you measure surveillance? Well, that's why, because like if you want to tie economic conditions to surveillance, and that's not like a big work you're doing, you would need to have some number that you could say is reasonably surveillance. My other thought there would be, you've got city data in terms of surveillance. How granular would you be able to get that to region? Would you get, like, if you could get that sort of data down to a zip code, that would be a really neat but I don't know how you're getting that. You get what I'm saying, right?
Steal their password.
I'm asking. This isn't some. It sounds like you're pretty early, so I'm just asking the questions that I would be asking if I was and sometimes having a good question that someone else asked can be a good way to jump. Because every time you answer a question, even if you don't get a good answer, you unveil other questions.
Yeah.
I'm Paul. Yeah. David. Pleasure.
I thought.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I'm consulting with her.
Who's right where I talk to them, just focus on driving. Like if you were to stick around them and see, oh, this guy has but I've never really thought about it. It's all the implications of that. That's the thing. That's the thing. I just thought it'd be better if just were driving instead.
There are a lot of laws that are made that kind of make sense when you understand that the police are human and kind of gonna fuck up a lot and not notice everything, or are just gonna let things go and think, it's not really a problem. And don't make a lot of sense when they are either universally implemented or worse, selectively implemented.
Yeah, and a lot of times
which happen to have certain very obvious characteristics.
Yeah, you still have my email, you can say.
What is, I'm Paul, my name's Paul.
I don't know.
Like Christopher, was kind of a change. So, do you have a technical background?
Science degree.
Okay. UT? Okay, cool. Live in Austin? Actually, if you are looking for something to like put on your resume, I can offer the organization would like help with
I'm gonna finish gathering up stuff and then we know.
Shout out.
I've been summoned.
No, just, but we, a lot of what we do is offering technical support to charities, and there have been cases where people have done that job as sort of like a break. Like my own girl did a job for them, and that project was used as a big line item on